But just to introduce myself, I know both of you. I'm Tammy Cupples, Executive Director of Online Learning and Academic Technologies. And I'm excited to join Jose today in talking about active learning, not just because of my role here at FIT, but because of my 10 years of teaching at Northeastern University and in community colleges, where I found that active learning really made such a difference in student engagement and the overall learning process. So I just wanted to say a little bit about active learning and why it's been such a focus of our office over the last couple of years, and why we've dedicated 2 workshops this semester to this topic. So we've grown the number of online courses dramatically in the 13 years I've been here. We've gone from about 50 online sections per year to over 700 online sections per year. And we promise in our mission that our online courses offer exciting, dynamic learning experiences filled with meaningful interaction with the professor and also teamwork. So we really rely on the active learning experiences to take our online courses to the next level. And it's not just about online courses. For us, it's also about all course content in the online environment. That's what our office is really concerned with. Our office serves instructors of blended courses and Web Enhanced FacetoFace courses who find that students learn better when they are experientially involved with their course content. Of course, we discovered during the pandemic that active learning experiences can be weaved into all online course content, and that students succeed when they are doing more than just passively listening. So the concept of active learning isn't new. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it or are already using it, but many of the tools you'll see Jose talking about are new. And that's been one of the most exciting things about my role at FIT, seeing Jose introduce faculty to these tools and seeing the faculty just run with them and use them in a really sophisticated way. So I stopped teaching 8 years ago now, and that seems like a lifetime in terms of what instructors have access to and the tools our office has been able to integrate into Blackboard. There are a lot of different strategies that fall into the category of active learning, and I know Jose has a lot to share with you in terms of what active learning is and isn't. So I'll turn it over to him, but I'll just share as a final point that one of my rules of thumb in making my classes stand out from traditional classes was always, is everyone actively engaging? Because if it's just a few students responding to questions and engaging with the material during your lecture, that falls more in line with a traditional course. In contrast, a class with successful active learning activities provides an opportunity for all students in class to think and engage with the material. So that's like how I like to draw that line. And that's what I think is the best model. So I know Jose has a lot more to share, and I'll turn it over to him. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you, Tammy. I have some slides, but I'm going to put them on the chat there. And basically, you know, I tried something different this time. I just made the slides more of a resource. So if you go to the slides, and if you, maybe I can share my screen, and if you just make a copy or save them on your as your own, you can then take the slide deck and use it as a resource and come back to it, because there is a lot of, I mean, this one had a lot more resources than I usually go into. So I'm not gonna go too deep, but I just want to let you know that these slides are there for you, and that you can always go back and go over them, you know, and the recording as well. We're gonna, you know, the recording is also will be there. So I see people are clicking in on the slides. So to make it your own, you can simply click on File, and you know, you can make a copy of the entire presentation, and you can even rename the file if you want to change the title, something that's other than Active Learning Fall 2021. And then this will go into your Google Drive, and so it becomes your own resource. So you can always go back and revert to what you know, review what we studied, review what we covered today. And yeah, and so Tammy covered a lot, and this is great because now Tammy has made it a lot easier for me. Let me go on presentation mode. And can everyone see the slides? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So like I said, again, it's heavy on, and I apologize if I'm reading, because a lot of it, my intention was to make this much more of a resource. So if I'm just reading from the slides, I apologize, but that's the way I create these slides more of a resource, right? So just to reiterate what Tammy just, what is active learning? So here are some sources I pulled up from, reliable sources. This one's from Bonwell and Eisen, Instructional Activities Involving Students in Doing Things and Thinking About What They Are Doing, right? So the key word, what they are doing, as opposed to what Tammy mentioned, passive learning, as you're sitting in the classroom and listening to a lecture. That's considered more of a passive approach. Here's another one from Handelsman, Miller, and Bunn. Teaching that promotes students' active learning asks students to do or produce something, which then can serve to help assess understanding. So having your students do something as opposed to just sitting there and just listening to you lecture away, you have your students here now actually creating something that's related to your topic. And the last one here, number 3, students' efforts to actively construct their knowledge. Right. And so this was a little bit different because this one kind of mentions what do the students already know and how do they build upon what they know and associate the knowledge that they have obtained previously and how do they build upon that. So that's another part that's important, and we'll talk more about that in later slides. Here's another one, Bonwell and Eisen again. Instructional activities involving students in doing things and thinking what they are doing. So, not only they're producing something, but they're thinking about what they're creating, right? So that's also crucial in critical thinking. This one, it has active learning implies that students are engaged in their own learning. Active teaching strategies have students do something other than taking notes or follow directions. They participate in activities to construct new knowledge and build new scientific skills. And this one's from Handelsman. I just want to point out this one has keywords in this one, and I want to just focus on instead of just taking notes. Although I'm a big believer that taking notes and having students touching a pen or a pencil and writing actual notes is a crucial point of learning, but it's also much more than that. Where students actually participate in constructing new knowledge and building upon what they already know. And so these kind of like will reiterate exactly what we've been talking about, Tammy has said, and what I'm saying. This one also, active learning engages students in the process of learning through activities and or discussions in class, as opposed to passively listening to an expert, right? It emphasizes higher order thinking and often involves group work. So now this one talks about group work. And I also highlighted group work here. So that's another key word that we're going to talk about today, group work. And Tammy mentioned passively listening. So those are the two key words that I wanted to highlight on this one. But this is Freeman. I always post this video, and Antonio, you've probably seen it before. I always reuse this one, but I think it hits the point, right? So this is from I'm an 80s kid. I'm an 80s kid, so I'm big into 80s movies. This is, remember, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and this is the professor talking to the students, and this is how his
Classic.
lecture is done. It's a classic, right, Tammy? I mean, this is, you
Yeah,
can't go wrong. I want to go
Such
back
a
to
classic.
this. And I remember I used it at one of our online learning training, and someone said that, hey, this all was improvised, so I didn't know that. So that's
Oh
nice.
yeah, right, yeah.
So let me just play a little bit about it so you get an idea of passive learning as opposed to active learning. Oops.
Uh-oh.
Oh my God. There we go.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government.
So I would use this video because I always like to ask, what is he doing wrong and what's happening in the classroom. Can anyone, want to jump in and say something about like what's going on in his classroom?
That actor is so perfect. His monotone is not only the voice, but even the expression and the multi-syllabic words instead of just getting to the point.
Right. That's a great insight. But also, I also like to point out that he is trying to kind of get the class involved, but he doesn't even give them time. He doesn't pause, right, for the response. He kind of like gives them the answer right away. He kind of gave up on them, so they gave up on him, right? So if you give up on your students, they're going to give up on you. And I think that's, although he's trying to get them involved, he just, I know professors where they, you get an adrenaline kick and you're like going, rushing through the whole thing, and and there's no time for pause. There's no time for, letting
Well,
others.
at least if they get an adrenaline rush.
Oh, right. Exactly.
At least that's at least.
Right. At least that's a good thing. In this case, I think there's a lack of some adrenaline of this guy. So anyway.
I don't know. I was getting the feeling that he had not really. This wasn't review. This was even just the first time he's lecturing on this, and then asking them to fill in some very technical information that they don't have.
Right.
I may be wrong. I don't know.
Right, and not only that, but also the fact that he's asking questions, nothing is happening, the students are responding in the monotone voice, and again passively. This looks the passive learning that Tammy brought up early in the conversation, in the talk. So what is the theoretical basis on active learning? So activities that students do to construct knowledge and understanding. The activities vary, but require students to do higher order thinking. Although not always explicitly noted, metacognition students thinking about their own learning is an important element, providing the link between the activity and learning. So kind of having the students understand why you're having them, why are you breaking them into groups? Why are we discussing, or whatever it is, the activity that you decide to do with your students. Also there has to be a link between the activity, but also what you're trying to teach them. So I'm going to talk more about that later, where you kind of like explain to them. Actually, it's a good idea to explain to students what is active learning and why you're doing it, right? Being transparent with your students, because that also helps them become independent learners themselves. Here's another one. This one's from Bransford. Constructivist, and so active learning is very similar. Almost, you can use it two words: constructivist learning as active learning. It's a theory that emphasizes that individuals learn through building their own knowledge, connecting new ideas, and experiences to existing knowledge, and experience to form new or enhanced understanding. And I'm going to talk more about this one because, as you know, you have students who come into your class, and you have students that are the know-it-alls. They think they know everything, and they come in with preconceived misconceptions, right? And so that could be challenging for a professor, because then if you break them up into groups, then you might have students who are spreading like now, like what we say, what is it, a false narrative, or and you do want to have the social learning in your classroom, but then you also are afraid of these misconceptions that are being spread, and so it's a careful balance between building upon knowledge, but also making sure that the knowledge that's there is accurate, right? And so building upon the foundations of what you're teaching them to then expand, and not only that, to associate what they already learned, but what they already know, right? And so this is why I always think that icebreakers are crucial, because you can learn a lot from your students, and then you can use that information that you gather from your students to then create these lesson hooks, or figure out what the students already know, what they're into, to then kind of pull them into the conversation. So here we talked about misconceptions, right? So learners can either assimilate new information into existing framework, or can modify that framework to accommodate new information that contradicts prior understanding. And so that's what we talk about misconceptions, and that's why it's difficult at times to kind of have students come into your classroom think they know it all, but they have some wrong information, and then but then you can use it to your advantage. I'm going to talk about that a little later, how you can use misconceptions to your advantage. And here's an example, right? So teachers can design learning activities that allow students to confront misconceptions, helping students reconstruct their mental models based on more accurate understanding. And so I worked with a professor, Eric Foner, who's a big time historian. And on the MOOC that we worked with him, we had um, we would ask the students a question before the lecture video was given to the student. And so right away we would ask a question to the student, what they think about slavery, what would they think about the Civil War, whatever that question was. And then the video lecture would follow. And then at the end of the learning sequence, we will follow up with the same question again, just to see how their opinions had changed. And we did that intentionally because we were trying to catch those misconceptions early on. And so that's another way that you can use misconceptions in your classroom to then frame that model, the framework on the to take that existing framework and modify it to then accommodate the new information that you're teaching your students. If that makes any sense. So basically, that's what you're doing, right? So you're exposing those students with a initial discussion prompt. And it could, you do this in your online course where you can propose a discussion prompt in the beginning of your learning sequence for that week. Then you have them go into the lecture videos, and after everything between, then you drop the discussion prompt again with the same question and trying to figure out if their opinions have changed after watching the video lecture. That's an example of misconceptions. Learning takes place when students solve problems beyond their current developmental level with the support of the instructors or their peers. And this one's Vygotsky. So, having students work in groups again in the classroom, and I'm going to talk more about that in a few more slides, where you can, there's some activities, and we're going to talk about how you can have your students work together, whether it's a peer-to-peer or pair share, and then have the students work together in groups or in pairs to then figure out the problem in front of them. So where is the evidence that the active learning works, right? Where can I'm going to show some evidence. I'm going to go through this quick because obviously a lot of these studies, they go back for more than 30 years, and you'll see a bunch of them here. Here's one that really is interesting to me. It's Freeman and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis of 225 studies comparing active learning to traditional methods. And students who were in traditional lectures were 1.5 times more likely to fail than students in courses with active learning. And so a lot of studies have been done showing active learning works. There's another one here where this one's on arts and sciences. It was found that 55% of those students who engage in traditional learning achieved a passing grade when post-tested, while corresponding 85% of active learners received a passing grade when post-tested. That's a big increase from 55 to 85 comparing traditional methods to active learning.
Wow.
This one's from Mello, David, and Les. But I mean, these are more, but I'm not going to go through all of them. These are different studies showing how active learning is a game changer. This is interesting because at the end it said the analysis supports theory claiming that that calls to increase the number of students receiving science or STEM degrees could be answered at least part by abandoning traditional lecturing in favor of active learning. I mean, so it's something where whenever we do these workshop presentations of active learning, you always have to be careful because I don't want to say, the lecture is dead. It's not. We're not saying that lecturing is completely dead. Is the sprinkling of active learning within your lecturing, right? And incorporating some of the activities to increase engagement in your classroom. And so it's not just that the whole 2 hours of classroom time have to be all about lecturing. This one's interesting. This one was 6,000 students were examined, physics course, and again performance increased. I mean, there's so many of them. There was one I wanted to highlight, but it's too much of them. I'm going to continue forward. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so why is it important? And so this one I think is crucial, as we now are doing a lot of inclusive learning, right? So that everyone's included, not just the few who are always participating or always raising their hands. This is a study in the University of Washington, their EOP program, which are I think the education opportunity. These are students who are low income, students of minority, and so in this study, they EOP students were enrolled in an intro biology course, and they had a mean failure rate of 22, about an average of 22%, compared to a mean failure rate of 10% of students who were not in the EOP program. And then when active learning was introduced, all students benefited, not just the EOP students. But what was key about the findings was that students in the EOP program demonstrated disproportionate benefit, reducing the achievement gap to almost half of the starting level. I mean, that's huge. I mean, from going from 22%, average fail, to then just splitting the gap in half from the starting level, and that's just from incorporating active learning into the classroom. Not only does it there are studies about students of minority or students who are their first university students, first generation students from the family in the university, but also the study was done on male and female performance in an introductory physics class. They found that inclusion of active engagement benefited all students, but had the greatest impact on female students' performance. So not only male students are being asked to participate, the whole class is being asked to participate. And therefore, so in this case, female students had benefited most of all students. This one's from Laws and Schneider. So here's what I want to talk a little bit more about. What are some of the techniques you can use? And these are very simple, basic techniques. I'm not even talking about technology. I will mention some, but most of the tips or strategies I'm going to talk about can easily be done without technology in the classroom or online in your online class. And so this is the pause procedure. And we talked a little bit about this watching the Ferris Bueller video. And that's having, a moment of pause, right? And you pause for 2 minutes. Every 12 to 18 minutes, you just pause. And you encourage the students to participate, discuss, or work in pairs. And this approach encourages students to consider their understanding of the lecture material, including its organization. And this is interesting when it comes to Asian students, because a lot of times Asian students are kind of shocked when they see this approach in the classroom, because a lot of Asian students are not asked for their opinion or their thoughts, and so sometimes they're like, when a professor asks them, "What do you think about this?" they're a little bit taken aback, because if they come from Asian countries, most of the times they're not even asked their opinion. And so what I like about this is that it provides an opportunity for questioning, clarification, and it has been shown to significantly increase learning when compared to lectures without the pauses. This is from Bonwell Nyson also. Retrieval practice. I always talk about retrieval practice, one of my favorite, and I also go back to the book Make It Stick. Retrieval practice, similar to the Ferris Bueller video, in which, let's say he had taught this material before, he was reviewing the material. You will pause for 2 or 3 minutes every 15 minutes, having students write everything they can remember from the previous class. And you encourage questions. You encourage students to ask the questions. And this approach prompts students to retrieve information from memory. And what I like about this, that it can be done in an online class, is because if you're doing the learning sequence from week 1, it's always great to prompt them in week 2 for those same questions that were reviewed in the week 1. And that's really what retrieval practice is you're asking students questions, helping them retrieve that. And what's happening is that it's going from short-term memory to long-term. As every time you retrieve something in your memory, you're strengthening that memory in your brain. So therefore, you're moving it from short-term to long-term. So retrieval practice is great. You can do it in your lecture while you're doing lecturing in the classroom. And that's from Brame and Beal. Demonstrations. Demonstrations are great. You can ask students to predict the result of a demonstration before even doing the demonstration. You can have students talk with their neighbor and talk about what they think is going to happen. After the demonstration, ask them to discuss what they observed, what were the results, and how did it differ from their prediction. And then you follow up with your explanation of why it happened this way. This approach asks students to test their understanding of a system by predicting an outcome. Now, I remember in my high school years, there was a teacher who, it was a science teacher, and he had a frog, and he put the frog in a fish tank, or a fish bowl, I forget what it was, and then he just, you know, it was filled to the brim. You know, the tank was filled to the brim with water, and he dropped the frog in there, and then he covered the top. And then he looked at us and he said, "What do you think is going to happen?" And we're all panicking because we think the frog is going to die. You know, he just dropped in a frog in there. There's no air. We don't think that, you know, the frog can breathe. Anyway, and so that was an example of a demonstration where, you know, we're all the kids, all the students in the classroom were panicking because we're thinking this frog is going to die because there's no air for it to breathe. And then, you know, then he explains a lecture where he's saying, well, you know, the frogs, they breathe through the skin, you know, underwater. And so if there's enough oxygen in the water, the frog will not drown. The frog will breathe the skin, the frog's skin breathes air through the water. And so that's an example of the demonstration. And a lot of times professors do demonstration, which is great, but they forget to ask the student or to ask students to predict what they think is going to happen. Just like I said earlier with the phoner explanation, a demonstration of ask the student a question before the lecture video, and then the same question at the end, just to see if their predictions were correct. Now, another reason why to do this is because once you involve your student in your lecture, they buy into it, right? And so if you give an opportunity to think about the question, or give them a poll or whatever, a question, they're already buying into it. And so once they bought into it, they're all in. And that's what you're offering them here, is an opportunity to be part of what you're teaching them. So there's a bunch of these. I'm just going to go through them real quick, and I'm only going to cover those which I think are the most interesting ones. But not to say they're not all interesting, but they're all here, and so I'm going to share. Obviously, you all have the slides, so you can always come back. But this one is another fun one, is decision-making activities, right? So you ask your students to imagine that they are policymakers, and they can make and justify. They have to make and justify tough decisions. So you provide them a short description of a thorny problem, ask them to work in groups to arrive at a decision. And then you have them in groups share out their decision and explain their reasoning. This is highly engaging technique, helps students critically consider a challenging problem, encourage them to be creative in considering solutions. So these are real world, and Tammy mentioned this too in the beginning. So these are real world nature of the problems, and can provide incentives for students to dig deeply into the problems. So now you're asking your students to, okay, you're like almost like a case, real world case scenario, and then now you're in a position of decision making. What are you going to do? You know, what are the consequences of your decisions? And have you thought your decision thoroughly, right? And so here's an example of a decision-making activity. So you can ask your students, you know, you're the head of a major blood bank, and there is a worldwide blood shortage. You're offered a shipment of blood that might be contaminated with a new retrovirus that has not been well studied. Will you allow the blood to be used? Why? would you like to know before you make it? So you see, you're putting them in a tough situation. They're working in groups and trying to figure out the pros and cons and what are we going to do. And so it's critical thinking. You're going to have them think in groups and what is the best solution for the for this. What's the best solution for this problem?
And
I've covered.
just to jump in, all these examples really beautifully can lend themselves to the asynchronous environment, right? I mean, you're talking about having groups split out and talk about things, but these are great examples for discussion boards and also for voice threads. I mean, I see students, some of those questions, that last example, to have each student, post a 30-second video of themselves talking about what they think and reacting to it, and then other students reacting on VoiceThread to that. Just, I know you're going to get into tools later, but I just want to point out that a lot of these are going to be great asynchronous activities.
No, that's a great point. And again, jump in if you have an example of one of these activities and you've used in your online course, and how a lot of times when what I've noticed too, Tammy, is a lot of professors who teach online, and they use some of these activities, such as the decision making, and they'll create discussion thread on Blackboard. They eventually start using in the classroom. I see. So a lot of these activities that are intended for online can also trickle down to even the face-to-face classroom. But yes, like Tammy said, I am going to show some of these examples using Padlet in the next slide, and there's another one I'm going to show you using Poll Everywhere. So there's another tool that you can use to engage with your students.
Right, that's great.
This one is a think, pair, share, and I've talked about this before in the previous workshop. But basically, ask students a question that requires higher order thinking. And this is a very popular one. I've seen it a lot. You can ask your students to think or write about an answer for 1 minute. And this can also be done in Padlet. This can also be done in Blackboard discussion, right? Blackboard discussion has, I think, a peer-to-peer tool. And so you can have your students share their work in pairs, right? So you'll share what you wrote with another student, and then you ask your students to share responses and follow up with instructor. You can follow up with instructor explanation. So this is always a popular one. It also helps students articulate newly formed mental connection, like we said earlier. Now that they made these connections, now if they write it down, they show that they understand. It's again strengthening that new connection in the brain. This is another similar one. This is peer instruction. This is a modification of the think, pair, share. This is the one that you can use Poll Everywhere. It's a free tool. I've used it before, and Jeffrey, we both used it on a presentation where we engage with the audience, right? And so you can pose a conceptually based multiple choice question, ask students to think about their answer, and then they vote. And again, we talked about earlier about inclusivity, right? Everyone's participating. It's not just those few students who just raise their hands. And we saw how that affected minority students as well as female students, right? So this is a tool. I have the link here if you're interested. You can, if you click on the link, it'll take you to Poll Everywhere. You can also download the extension that will go into your PowerPoint slides. PowerPoint or Google Slides. If you prefer Google Slides, it works for both. So this is a way to encourage students to engage, right? And once they engage, they bought into, right? So as soon as you get them participating and they submitted an answer, they already bought into the idea that we're all, they're all in part of the lecture. They're already part of this, what you're teaching them. And so it's not just you telling them the whole time. They get an opportunity to then jump in the bandwagon, right? As opposed to just moving right along and just telling them what they need to know. This one can also be done in Padlet or Blackboard. It's basically minute papers. Ask students a question that requires them to reflect on their learning or to engage in critical thinking. You can have them write for 1 minute. Ask students to share responses, again, with each other. It's very similar to the think, pair, share approach. And also, like, I've seen professors here also use journals in Blackboard. This is another way you can use journals. This one's interesting. This is a strip sequence. So basically, you give students the steps of the process in strips of paper, or you can put it on a Padlet, and they have to put it in order. What it's basically doing is having students, you're strengthening students' logical thinking of the processes and test their mental model of a process. So as they build the mental model of this process, you're testing them that they know the steps, right, in order, in the sequence. You can use this with Padlet using a Canvas template, and then the students will move or put them in order. This is great for asynchronous teaching, so that you can test your students and see if they know. You can assess your students with this exercise, and also help strengthening the knowledge. This one I love a lot. I love this one a lot. Is a concept map. Concept maps are visual representations of the relationships between concepts. You can put concepts usually put in circles and nodes. You can have students work together in groups or individually, and you can ask your students to determine the general relationship between the concept and to arrange them in order. And drawing arrows between related concepts, and very important is to label with a short phrase to describe the relationship. And here's an example using Padlet of this type of activity. And so here we have a Padlet, and I've used it before in the teaching with technology with Jeffrey. And in this case, we have James Brown, and so you can say, ask your students who has been influenced by James Brown. And so if I click on plus, and then if I search, let's say Michael Jackson, and if I find a good photo here of Michael Jackson, I'll say this one. And let me just type his name here. And if I publish this, right, so now this is a concept map, right? So now how do I connect these two? How has James Brown influenced Michael Jackson? This is what the labeling part comes in. So if I click on the three dots, I connect to a pose. And if I say choreography, right? This is how the two are connected, right? And so you can do this in asynchronously. And so now I can also put here, for example, let's say if I want to add Prince, right? Prince is also influenced by James Brown, right? In the music, in the lyrics. And so I can make another connection here. And if I search for Prince, I know, Antonio, you're a big Prince fan.
Huge.
I like this one with the pink. So let's say we put Prince in here. Again, right? So you see how this is a concept mapping, right? And I've seen this being used also in marketing classes here at FIT. So package branding. What is the message, the consumer message? And this is another way to do this, right? So here I'll connect. And here's a labeling, right? So you also got to have the student explain why are the two connected, right? So if I say music / lyrics, and so this is how a concept map will work. So that's another way you can use this in your asynchronous class or your online course, and you can have a Padlet within your course. And that's an example there. I like this a lot. Student-generated test questions. Have your students provide your students a copy of your learning goals. All right, so your students already know what is expected because you're giving them the learning objectives for this unit. And then you challenge your students to create test questions based on those learning objectives. And then what you do is the students can then vote, right? So if you want to do this on a Padlet, you can do this on a Padlet too. You can have your students put their questions that they generated, put it on a Padlet, and then everyone can vote on the top questions. And then you can use that for your review exam or as a study guide, right? So then you can have the students use the question that they generated and use that as a study guide. This approach helps students consider what they know as well as implications of the instructor's stated learning goals. So it's a combination of the learning objectives, but also what the students believe they know or that they don't know, right? And so they create their question based on things that they don't know. or that they do know. And so this is a fun exercise you can use in the classroom. Do I want to cover this one? Content form function online. This is a common one used in high schools. Is the have students do the what, how, and why. I always saw this in I remember my high school year. I always had a teacher using this. So it's a fun way to have students analyze a poem or a story or an essay or an image or whatever it is, an advertisement. And then they gotta understand, identify what is the what is the how, and what is the why. And this technique can help students consider the various ways that meaning is communicated in different genres. This is Angelo and Cross. Discussions we talked about. I'm not gonna go through that. I'm not gonna take much time. So there's a couple here. I'm just gonna quickly go through them because we're running out of time. Oops, I missed one thing here. So how should you get started? Right, you should start small, start early. Start with activities that pose low risk, and that's almost a clear definition of an icebreaker, right? Low risk, starting early, start small. Not only for the students, but also for you, right? It's low risk for you also. It's an icebreaker. Not much can go wrong. There are no grades, so you can start early and start very simple. And it doesn't have to be technology based. You can actually just ask a question. The pause procedure, retrieval practice, minute papers, and think, pair, share technique provide easy entry points to incorporating active learning approaches, requiring the instructor to change very little while providing students an opportunity to organize and clarify their thinking. It's also a good idea to explain to your students how active learning works and helping them become independent learners. So not just practicing active learning, but also teaching your students about active learning. It will help them become independent learners themselves as they understand, like retrieval practice is a great example, flashcards. If they understand how active learning works, they won't fall back to failed methods of studying like cramming, right? Cramming is proven that it doesn't move the knowledge from short-term memory to long-term. Cramming, they're gonna cram for several hours before the test, and it's just exactly what it is. It's cramming. It doesn't move the from short-term to long-term memory. You're gonna forget it if you don't actually do retrieval practice and strengthen those associations. And so if you teach them along with practicing active learning, you're making your students much more independent learners. And with that, I'm going to stop there. And if there aren't any questions, there's the frog that survived from my high school years. He didn't drown. And so, if there are any questions, or anybody wants to share how they're using active learning?
Can I just add, Jose, that so much. I love these new tools we have because I'm thinking of my days. I used to teach organizational communication and organizational ethics, and we used the whiteboard so much, and we used the blackboard so much, and I would generate feedback and write everyone's ideas, and to be able to turn that over to Padlet and other tools like VoiceThread, it makes it so nice for everyone to be able to just contribute that way. So I think that's great. I guess I also wondered about embedded quizzes. I know we don't really have a great tool. We've gone through H5P, but I know a lot of professors want to embed pop-up quizzes in their lectures, especially their pre-recorded lectures as they're moving along. Is there a recommended tool at this point, even a free tool to play with, or should we maybe just keep trying to identify the best recommended tool?
Yeah, I mean, Poll Everywhere is a great tool. It's free. Let me share my screen one more time so I can show you where it is or how it looks like. But it's a great way to then insert those questions or polls.
Can you insert them into a PowerPoint or something?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering about asynchronous. So where you don't have to be a presence and you don't have to present the quizzes. You know,
Oh,
like
right.
where a student can watch a lecture and then take up, you know, really like a self-learning activity. I think that we're still trying to identify the best tool because some of them have been very cumbersome in terms of a learning curve, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Poll Everywhere will work asynchronously if you provide the PowerPoint and the students go through the PowerPoint. But yes, you're right.
Yeah.
We need a tool where like a puzzle,
Yeah.
where then we create our videos, and then in the videos itself, the students can then interact with questions, multiple choice, true and false, or polling.
Right.
And that's exactly more what you're talking about, Tammy, right? That's more of a
Yeah. I think that will be nice to be able to, you know, help guide faculty with those. Yeah.
right. And another tool that we do have that will work in that way, Tammy, would be VoiceThread. Not many faculty know that you can actually do that in VoiceThread. And basically, the idea behind that is using VoiceThread, you record your lectures along with your slides, and then within that slide, you will have, let's say, a discussion prompt already pre-planned, and then the students will then either, depending on how you want them to answer, either in text or audio, they can do a recording, and then all the students' responses will go on that one slide of the question. And so VoiceThread can actually do that.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe a workshop for next semester. That would be really good, I think.
Yeah, Jane Warner uses it in that way. I have her. She gave me discussion prompts, and I helped her design her course in that way. Yeah.
Nice.
Lisa has a question.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you gave me a new name for what I'm interested in, which is Web Enhanced FacetoFace. Because whether or not it's permissible, I have, ever since teaching remotely, have now added some discussion forums and some Padlets that are considered part of the homework, okay? And I remember years ago being told by a colleague that if I was teaching a face-to-face class, I was not allowed to have a discussion in Blackboard because that was an online component and those were not to mix. And of course, we're in a very different world now. Okay.
Yes.
So are there rules?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to that. You know, even before the pandemic, there were courses where the quiz is in Blackboard, the assignments are in Blackboard, the discussions are in Blackboard, and they're face-to-face courses, and that's completely fine. The only rule is you're worrying about seat time. So you want to make sure that the professor is still meeting with students and having the same contact hours in the classroom that they're supposed to have. But anything that you are assigning to them, whether it's during the class, and you know, if you're telling them during the class, go into this discussion and respond to this discussion, or go into this voice thread and respond there. That's an example of live web enhanced activity, and that's great. And you're still with them. You're still putting in the time. You just want to make sure, you know, and similarly with asynchronous activities, anything that's happening that you're assigning them outside of the classroom can, of course, happen through Blackboard and the LMS. So you just want to make sure you're not skipping. The rule is you're not skipping, you know, a 3-hour lecture during the week to be online with the students. You know, of course, I'm a big fan of any style of teaching that faculty are comfortable with in terms of using the technology. But that is the rule, that you're not to miss class time for, you know, being outside of the classroom and replacing it with online activity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, because you know, the idea of skipping time never occurred to me.
Well, you know, of course.
Yeah.
You know, we have in the past, once in a while, like there'd be a bad snowstorm and a professor would say, okay, let's meet on Collaborate instead. And I actually thought that was okay once in a while, but now I know that, you know, we really have to draw the line in terms of we're not promoting faculty, you know, doing that. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify something Patricia brought up at the beginning of the session about you went into a discussion about a pilot program and so on, and I didn't get what the actual topic was.
Oh yeah, the new LMS. So at some point we will be.
Okay. Okay.
There will be.
Got it.
So if you're interested in that, yeah, you can let me know if you're interested in the pilot.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, and I know I have another question. Did Patricia have a question?
No, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
That was a really great question.
Well, I'm really interested in the poll everywhere, but in a face-to-face class, can you do that?
Yeah, yeah. So Poll Everywhere is obviously a paid program, but with the free account, it covers. I mean, it's amazing how much you can do with it. I mean, I did a whole presentation with Jeffrey, and we wanted to make it engaging, and so along the slides, we would just sprinkle in some polls and questions, and we even did what they call them, a cloud. Oh gosh, I'm blanking. Oh my God, Tammy.
Where are you going? Where are you going with this? Cloud computing?
aren't we talking about online? And Lisa's question was, can you do it in a face-to-face course? Wouldn't you everybody have to have their own laptops?
Right, or phone, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
phone,
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Well,
Do I have to then, get compliance with everybody downloading an app before they come into the classroom?
so they're not even downloading. So what happens is it generates a code that then you give to your students, right? And then they take that code or the link, right? And then when they click on the link and then you enter the code, then you're in the room, and it's a private room, right? Because only your students. And then from there, then they're part of the room, and then they can then participate in the polls, the multiple choice questions, and maybe I'll do. Actually, I am doing a workshop on that. I
Yeah,
think
the next one, I think.
I think the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You're going to go into more depth on this in the second part.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And you're right. You're right, Lisa. It could be used, yes, asynchronously and synchronously. It works much better synchronously, obviously, because it slides, right? And then you're there in front of the class, and then you're going through your slide, and then you hit that slide that's an engagement slide, and then that's when you do the pause, and then the question comes up, and then they go on their phone or their laptop, and then they put in their answer, and then in real time, the answers go up on the screen. Oh, the word cloud. I was looking for Tammy. The word cloud.
Oh, word count. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it's a word
Yeah.
cloud, you see all the words pop up. Or if it's a multiple choice, you can have graphs go up based on the answer is A, B, or C, whatever the students picked. And it's also a great way to do that, to do one of those slides, engagement slides, before you move from one topic over to another, because then you can assess your students. And it's anonymous, right? So then no students are afraid to participate.
Great.
Because, right, it's universal design, everyone's participating, and then you gauge whether it's okay to move forward, or if there's a couple of wrong answers, then you can stop and say, you don't know who the students are, but then you can actually pause and either do what's called oh my gosh, I'm blanking. I think I took some medicine, but then you can ask your students where are they stuck, where are they having trouble understanding, and then you can do a little recap and go back as to why shouldn't we move on until everyone is there, right? Like no one left behind, right? You want to make sure everyone's covered before you move on to a new topic.
Okay.
Yeah. Muddy
Great.
points.
That's really helpful.
I'm like
Wait,
10
what?
seconds. Muddy points, right? So muddy
All
points
right.
are things,
Yeah.
right? Those are the muddy points, right? Where students are stuck on something, right? And it's like a mud. You put your foot in and you can't get it out. So like students are stuck on something, and you're trying to figure out before you move on to the next topic.
Yep.
So yeah, they're great. I love them. And again, you're getting buy-in from your students, because once they participate on something, they buy in, and then you got them, right? You got them, as
Yep,
opposed
totally.
to. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great question. Yeah. All right.
Should we stop the recording now, Jose?
Yeah, I think we're good.